Hi, everyone. My name is Ruby Powers with the Powers Law Group. We're talking about employment visas versus work permits. What are the differences? I think a lot of people use these words a little interchangeably, and we just wanted to explain that. So I am a board certified immigration attorney with Powers Law Group, and we are Houston located, but we have global reach and can help assist anyone in the world on U.S. immigration matters. So, what is the difference between a work permit and a work visa? So the visas and work permits, sometimes you basically need the visa to get the work permit, and sometimes you get the work permit based off of some other status. So that's really a good way to think about it. And again, this doesn't take the place of legal advice. This is information, and we always suggest to have a consult with an experienced immigration attorney, like ourselves, if you want, to make sure to go over this with your specific case. So visas and work permits are both legal documents and required for working abroad, but they serve different purposes. So when it comes to working abroad, obtaining the necessary work paperwork can be complex and time consuming, but both require a significant amount of paperwork and documentation, but it depends on what we're talking about. So the visa is like the underlying concept that allows you to permission to enter or leave. And usually there's a stamp in your passport, or there's a approval notice. And usually you either are applying with USCIS or at the consulate, and they can be issued at the embassy or consulate, and it sort of depends on what visa we're talking about. Now, the work permit, this will allow you work authorization. It's usually there's a card or a document, and it's issued by the government. Now, to make things even more confusing, sometimes by just having the visa, you don't need to get the work permit. And so this can be really confusing. Okay. And so when is each option applicable? Well, the visas are typically required for various purposes. So business meetings, tourism, attending conferences. So visas are for lots of things. But when we're talking about like a work visa, there's certain ones. There's a handful of those. Now, work permits, we also call them work authorization, employment authorization document, EAD. When the visa or the status that you have allows you to apply for a work authorization, and you'll know there's a list of them, then you would need to, and they require that you apply for the work authorization card, then you would need to do so. Some visas, like I was mentioning, by virtue of having it, you don't need to apply for a card, like generally like an E, an H, and L, for example. So what are some of the benefits and limitations? So visas allow you to engage in various non-employment activities. So that's what we were talking about, more of like a tourist visa or student visa or certain things like that, and limitations. But they some of those same types of visas don't have a work permit allowed with them. So really have to know, when people say work visa, what type of visa is it? And there's some limitations to what that is. But when you're saying visa in general, that could also include so many others that have no connection whatsoever to work. But when we say work permit, that or employment authorization document, then we're talking about a card generally that's tied to providing you evidence of work authorization, that's tied to some type of a status. So work permits, they're enable you to work. They are tied to a specific position. Well, actually, particular status. And there can be restrictions, even like when optional practical training, that you need to stay in the line of study that you have and have so much time that you either work or volunteer. So those are just some things you have to consider. Now, there's types of work visas or employment visas here in the US, and so that's important to know, like H-1B, H-1B1 from Chile or Singapore, H-2A, H-2B, and E-1, E-2. But again, it depends if you're a member of a citizen of a country that has a treaty with the United States. For example, the E2, Mexico does have the treaty, Venezuela doesn't, Pakistan does, India doesn't. And that list can be, their new countries can be added over time. Some of those countries have had treaties for like a couple hundred years. E3, that one's relatively not so complicated from Australia. So some of these visas are very specific to what you're going to do and what country you're from. The TN is a great one for people from Canada and Mexico. P visa. There's also the O visa, extraordinary artists, teachers, scientists, business people, and a J and the R for religious workers. So for some of these, you have to get the work authorization card, and some of them, for most of them, you don't, because by virtue of having them, then you don't need the work authorization. So that's actually pretty good. But then there's other things where you need the work permit or the work authorization document. And this can be things from like temporary protected status, asylum pending, parole. And so if the status that you have or the parole that you have allows work authorization, and a good way to look is the I-765 instructions on USCIS.gov website, then they'll let you know whether it's allowed or not. So how do I apply for the work authorization, the employment authorization document? Well, I-765, and it can be submitted over paper or online. And you have to put the right code. So the code of what type of visa you have or status that you have. And then they, and some things have some specific issues, like if you're applying under asylum pending, you have to wait 150 days after the case has been filed, and they can't approve it until at least 180 days total have passed. So hopefully that helped explain the difference between some misconceptions between work visa and work permit. And we do use a lot of different terminology, but hopefully that was a good overview. But again, it doesn't take the place of immigration advice. So you can reach us all these different ways. Our website, our phone number, 713-589-2085. And we can help guide you through this process and help understand. So you can see us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and X. And so I'm so glad you could join us. We're going to do this presentation in Spanish as well. And we still have motions to reopen in immigration court and marriage-based green cards, common questions, timeline, and do's and don'ts. Thanks so much for watching. Share, subscribe, however you're watching, and stay in touch with us and let us know how we can help you.